Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining the Reigniting Main Street podcast. I'm Laura Richards, and I'm here today with Patrick Lee to discuss navigating business in a time of uncertainty.
Hey, everybody. Laura and I were talking this morning, and we had a podcast planned topic, but we decided to go off topic today because as we were watching the whole concept of reopening here, the reopening of the economy, the getting back to business as usual, it struck us how different today looks compared to about 2 weeks ago. This whole reopening, I don't think has gone the way that anyone had it planned. And I think there is almost a desire to sort of will it that things were just going to be good and positive and we were just going to plow through this. But I think that the numbers coming back around the pandemic, the struggles of many of the states that sort of pioneered the reopening and got ahead of the curve on that are so bad, and there's so much distrust amongst the population in regards to who to follow leadership wise and where this all goes, that I think it was kind of obvious to us that we need to revisit this. We need to talk about what it is that we see going on out there and what does this mean for the small business owner, because the uncertainty right now is incredibly high.
Patrick, we were also discussing kind of this COVID-19 whiplash, if you will, where businesses were in the mode of reopening, very enthusiastic, excited, embracing protocols, and I don't want to say feeling like they were in the clear, but certainly having optimism around bringing employees back to work and getting revenue going. I think what we've experienced here in Maryland to some extent, particularly on the Eastern Shore in that direction, is some businesses they opened and almost had a business as usual feel about what they were doing. They were wearing masks. They were somewhat committed, but maybe not carrying those protocols through 100%. And they're now, closing. And I'm not going to name names, but there's several businesses in the Kent Island area that are being affected by this right now. And that Queen Anne's County now has the highest rates of COVID-19 in the state, where they were the lowest before. So we're seeing the effects of, and some of it's obviously consumer driven, consumers not doing what they need to do in order to stay protected and stay safe.
I also think there's two parts there. There's that false euphoria that, hey, we were closed down for a while, our businesses were in danger, and now we're reopening. So we're flying back in, and you can't help but be optimistic in that case. I mean, it feels better as a business owner to be making decisions, even if you're making decisions around, let's get the hand sanitizer set up, let's get our protocol set up, let's get the mask on, let's tell our clients what they need to do. That gives you a feeling of purpose and progress, right? So I do see why there was sort of that back to business as usual. I think the big issue here, though, is that I think there's a couple of things not working in sync. The idea of just reopening as a revenue piece, that makes sense for government, right? I mean, government just, if every business is open and we're got our people employed and we have to pay them a paycheck, we're getting money into the hands of folks who need it. We're moving money through the economy. But for the small business owner, when your margins were already relatively low, or you don't have a lot of capital sitting around, that's a tricky thing. Is it worth it even being open, right? Is revenue generation what you're about? Generally not, right? I mean, we all know the small business owner is the last ones to get the paycheck. If things are going bad, right, they're the last one to get paid, right? If I'm keeping my business open and I want to keep my employees, I can't afford not to keep the benefits in place. Like, the sacrifices being made by the small business owner, to what end? How long does this go on? Is there a clear path to them being profitable again, to doing the level of revenue they need to do to make this make sense? I'm not sure any of that data was provided in a meaningful way. And now we have a bunch of businesses who are finding out the hard way that indeed reopening has its own hazards, because how many times can you reopen, close down, which takes a bunch of effort, reopen, which takes a bunch of effort? That in itself is a huge cost and a distraction and another uncertainty.
Well, you're right. I mean, when you talk about fluidity, and particularly in the restaurant business, there's so much that goes into that. Obviously, think about the physical inventory that a restaurant has. So when you're closing down out of the blue, you could have, thousands and thousands of dollars in inventory on your hands that won't be good when you come back. So there are a lot of factors there. And one of the things that you and I were discussing is this whole idea of benchmarking. How often do we need to benchmark to see if what we're doing is cost effective? Does it make sense for us financially to do it? And it's different, obviously, across different industries. And how do we see what's coming next and benchmark for that? Because this isn't set it and forget it. We are in a very fluid situation. It's changing rapidly.
And I think that points out that there's two different mentalities and approaches to what you have going on here. In times of uncertainty, a lot of ways to get through that uncertainty is to focus in on an objective. We're going to go there. You put the blinders on. You avoid all the crazy stuff going on outside, and you just plow ahead. That may work for uncertainty, but in these times, we're also in a time of a need for massive adaptation and innovation. And adaptation and innovation requires your scope to broaden. It requires you to pay attention to a lot of factors. So you've got two things going on. You've got this desire to put on the blinders and survive the anxiety of that uncertainty. And at the same time, we've got to look at this in a way that we can be creative and innovative and all. Those two things work against each other. They don't work together. So the business owner is sitting there looking at, like, what do I need to do? How do I innovate? How do I make something out of nothing here? What do I need to do, right? But at the same time, they're frozen because the data coming at them is all over the place. It's not giving a clear directional thing. There's total uncertainty. I mean, we still don't know if schools are going to open. We still don't know if we're going to stay with restaurants being allowed to have people inside, or if we're going to go back to it's carry out only or outdoors only. There's so much that changes within short periods of time that it's hard to even know how to parse the decision-making data, right? So I think one of the things that has to happen is we need to recognize that making decisions in the moment is not always the best thing. It's reactionary. The headline that you saw that morning, the mood you woke up in, the bad news that you got over here or the good news you got over here influences you emotionally when you're making decisions. So you're probably better off in a situation like this doing two things. The first is be clear what you're working on. If you're working on the uncertainty and making business decisions, then work on that. If you're working on adaptation and creativity and trying to think out of the box about your business, remove all of the business stuff that's getting at you. Remove that the decisions that are absolutely essential. You got to get your head clear to be creative and innovative, right? So know which thing you're working on at what time. Don't try to combine them. It becomes impossible and you get frozen. But once you've started working on those, set benchmarks. It's really difficult to make good decisions if you're just reacting to it. If you take the time to plot out your contingencies and to plot out the benchmarks along your plan so you know when you're going to do this or you're going to do that, then when the day comes that some piece of data comes in that instructs you that something needs to happen, you go back to your plan, you look at your little decision-making schematic, and you say, I said 3 months ago or whatever that was when I was laying this out that if this happens, this is what I'm going to do. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to do that. Circumstances may have changed, but what it does do is it makes you have to face the fact that I did analysis, I looked at this, and I said that if this happened, this was going to be what I did. Therefore, let me take that into account. Why did I do that? And if you decide not to go with what that original layout, decision-making wise, was, then at least you've had to consciously address that you did at one time set that benchmark, and here's why I'm not going to do that. The more you benchmark all of this now, the more you lay out the contingencies in case this happens or that happens now, the easier it is that you don't have to try to react in the moment, in a panic, in a certain mood, and make good decisions. This gives you a whole lot more objective ability to sort of, compare what you're thinking now to an analysis that you did at one time and thought well enough of it to lay it out as your plan.
It's really good advice. One of the things that I recognize, obviously, I'm not having to run my businesses during the pandemic, but I had some really unfortunate situations come up when I was in the restaurant business. And one of those was when a neighboring restaurant burned down. It literally, really just melted. It didn't quite burn down, but there was an electrical fire in the wall and pretty much everything melted. And that meant all the toxic smoke, soot, and ash filled my business. So on first blush, when I went in there, I thought, oh, this doesn't look really bad. I'll just clean up the water, have the health department come in. And in the end, the mitigation took 7 weeks, and that was a rush. And everything changed. I mean, in 7 weeks, you've got to either reaccommodate your employees and find people that can pay them, or you have to have discussions with them about coming back. And you want to make sure you're not going to lose everyone. And for continuity, you have to figure out your restocking. It's almost like opening a brand new restaurant because every single item in there had to be new. So I know what it means to stop and reassess and reevaluate everything and figure out the best way to move forward. And it really does take that pause. So I totally agree with what you said, Patrick, about how do you envision and innovate at the same time that you're pausing, because you want to pause to collect all the data you can about what's going on to make the most prudent decisions. So I think it's a strategy that works now, and I think it's a strategy that serves you well whenever you have a major disruption or change in your business. I think Patrick might be frozen. So talking about navigating your business in a time of uncertainty, I think this is one of those times. I'm uncertain when Patrick will become unfrozen. But I think the major thing that we wanted to emphasize to you all was about benchmarking, about thinking about the decisions that you're making today that are going to affect your business moving forward in this really stressed economic time. And it is fluid, and there are so many things that are going to come up, whether kids do or don't go back to school, for example, when the second wave of COVID-19 hits, and even buying and business trends moving forward. Are people going to continue to feel comfortable going out to retail stores? Are people going to continue to feel safe outdoor dining, and so on? So I think it's really important that you decide today what's important, what is the best practice for your business today, but you also benchmark it for the future. When will it not be a good time to continue operating the way you are currently? Making sure you're at least at a break-even point, you're not losing money, being open, and that being open is the best strategy for you. So I hope this was helpful for you today. We'll be back Tuesday with more of SBI's Reigniting Small Business. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you soon.